Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. The main objective of this presentation is to understand why biometric research and neuroscience in general are becoming more and more relevant to market research. We have structured this presentation into two main points. The first one is about neuroscience, and which is the new paradigm that has been shifted to understand human beings, and how these learnings are important for market research. After this, Helen will take you through our neuroscience journey and explain you why we are so engaged with neuroscience. We will do that showing a piece of research that we did with lab. To finish our contribution, we will share with you some thoughts that we want you to reflect with us after this. Maybe with this slide, and to see Descartes and Damasio in the same slide might surprise some of you. But we need to do that. We need to put the two paradigms, the old one and the new one, in the same sheet of paper. So let me take you back a little bit to explain why it's important to start with Descartes' thesis. His thesis putting on a pedestal the rational thinking man. This philosopher was from the age of the Enlightenment. He tried hard to separate humans from animals. And he separated, therefore, rational and emotional as two different parts to explain how people behave. It was Damasio at the end of the last century who broke with the century of this rationalism. And he demonstrated how our emotions were made through how our decisions were made through our emotions, and how actually the decision-making is not possible without emotions interviewing in the process. But maybe to understand a little bit better what we mean with emotional and what we mean with rational and the interaction between these two parts, we need to understand a little bit better the structure of the brain. I'm going to explain to you briefly what it's all about. We have three parts of the brain, three main structures. The first one is the brainstem was called the reptilian brain, and it's related to our survival instincts, so the famous fight and flight. Over the time, it was formed the limbic system, known as the emotional brain, and who has has two genetic codes to carry on, which is preservation and reproduction, and it's in charge of our emotional regulation and sexual arousal. Later on the top of all of this, there's the cortex, and it's in charge of decision-making and goal planning. And when the neuroimaging techniques and all the thesis from Damasio is that we could see that there is nothing going on there without interaction with the limbic system. And therefore, these allow us to think that the emotional brain, the limbic system, is more responsible for our behavior, but it's unconscious. And which is therefore the value of the cognitive neuroscience. As we have seen, and we can predict, a new paradigm has been shifted. So based on how our brain actually works, I think this emotional revolution has changed completely how we think about human beings. We used to think that we thought about something, came to a decision, and then you felt it. But we all know that this is total and correct model. The old model is wrong, because we feel something, we act accordingly, and we think if we need to. Therefore, we rationalize our real motivations. Because all of us, as researchers, scientists, advertisers, people, we use instincts when processing information and making decisions. We are able to come up with explanations. We are very good at this, but these are often post-rationalizations. We cannot explain our motivation at an aggregated emotional level, what feels right to us. And this has an enormous importance about how we understand consumer behavior. If then we try to jump into the world of the branding, and now we read the two definitions that we can see on the slide, I think then you can easily understand the importance of the concepts that we just mentioned about emotions, about memory. The first one, a brand in the brain, is nothing more than a web of connecting neurons that fire. The second one, the brain exists as a neural network of memories. Therefore, this is probably why we need to consider some elements, and neuroscience could explain better what they are all about. For instance, if we were saying that the brains are the connecting neurons that fire, we can understand the importance of the plasticity. The assumption before was that the brain connections were fixed, but the brain could reorganize itself. The brain is dynamic and constantly changing its connections. Every day we wake up with a new brain. Then the role of the unconscious, as we were saying earlier about the limbic system. Our brain is designed in the way to balance the unconscious and the conscious. Your limbic system decided what to let your conscious mind know. Then emotion, as measurable biological response. As I said at the first slide, it has been scientifically proven they're important to decision making. And as they make their origin in the body, we can measure them. Last one, the memory. We have to understand all the dimension of the memory, the implicit and the explicit dimension of it. Otherwise, we have a superficial understanding of the importance of the memory and how memory are related to emotions and tell us about the emotional engagement. All of this, it's really growing a new scenario where we must integrate this new knowledge and to use it in conjunction with other traditional research methods. And it's about incorporating cognitive neuroscience insights that we just mentioned. And I really want to point it out how important it is to understand the implications of the new paradigm, because we are really, if we understand this new paradigm, I think we already measure what people do, what people think, but it's equally important to measure what they feel. And this is the role of neuroscience. This is the missing link. But now, what we need to understand properly is the interaction between these three elements. We cannot ignore it.
Okay, so I'm now going to take you through a case study, but just before I do that, I just wanted to sort of highlight where we see the key opportunities are for using neuroscience within the research industry. And I think, firstly, it's to really use the learnings from neuroscience to validate and refine our survey approaches, to give a stamp of approval, if you like. So when we're measuring emotion and excitement in survey research, are we really measuring those reactions? And secondly, to try and develop tools, really optimize survey and neuroscience that combine biometrics with survey research to better understand consumer response. So the survey piece remains very critical, but can biometrics actually add additional learnings? Now, at TNSRI, we're obviously doing a lot to integrate neuroscience and a lot of R&D around innovation and product development research, retail and shopper. I'm talking to you today from a perspective of brand and communications. So I'm going to show you a quick case study, primarily to give you some early sort of initial learnings in relation to some of the key metrics that can come out of neuroscience. And this is taken from a piece of R&D work that we've been doing. There's 3 measures that I'm going to present to you, so I'm going to introduce the 3 measures first. You'll see the measures on the chart in front of you, and the trace at the bottom of the chart has 2 metrics on it. The first is what we call activation, and this is measured via galvanic skin response, which measures the change in electrical resistance of the skin due to changes in the autonomic nervous system. It's that short-term excitement element. It's that primitive fight or flight mechanism, the lie detector, and it measures really immediate arousal. The second metric that traces along the bottom is called relevance, and that's measured via EEG, and that records the electrical activity along the scalp. This is using multiple electrodes, and in my sort of layman's terms, this means that we're monitoring how much electrical activity there is across the left-hand side of the cortex, which is approach activity, and how much is on the right-hand side of the cortex, which is withdrawal. And the scale is simply looking at the left versus the right, so positive versus negative, and you can see the trace along the period of the commercial. The third measurement is something in terms of how you look at it. It's probably a little bit more familiar to you, which is the eye tracking, and this is shown using a heat map. So you're looking at various hotspots of where people are actually looking when they're having the biometric response below in terms of activation and relevance. So what we're looking at is when there are really high positives in relevance and strong activation, what is actually prompting that within the commercial. So hopefully some of you have been able to download the advertising beforehand. If you haven't, this is a 30-minute TV ad where we interviewed the target respondents for that advertising, and the ad storyline, if you like, is that there's 4 guys in a pub. They're playing the quiz machine, and they answer successfully a couple of questions on music and football, and they're then posed a question around ballet. So there's a long silence and suspense when they're trying to figure out the answer, and eventually one of the guys actually answers the question correctly. He has to replace his McCoy's crisp that he's eating at the time, and he is removed from the pub, and the tagline is McCoy's Man Crisps. So we tested this commercial using those metrics which I just presented, and I'm just going to show you really the key highlights. The first one, when we look at the biometric response, particularly the relevance response, we can see that this commercial is highly relevant to the target audience. The friends playing the quiz machine in the pub really appeals to that group, and particularly there's a period of very high relevance after the ballet question is posed. And oh,
it's not working.
Oh, sorry, I just skipped one. The second point from the advertising is looking at the activation line. And this, again, really coincided at that point where after the guy answers the ballet question correctly, his 3 friends are almost judging him. So this is really activating for the audience. And also when the brand is shown for the first time. And one of the things that we've really found from the trace to this advertising is that the brand mentions are really key. In fact, every time that the brand is shown, the activation response is really strong. So that's just a real sort of snippet of showing you some of the feedback in terms of really how that and everything else that we've done really linking to neuroscience has helped us. It's left us with some food for thought really. What we've actually used neuroscience for, as well as doing tests like I've just shown you, it's actually obviously testing our measurements of emotion. And it's helped us to understand that our projective tools for measuring emotion are actually reaching and getting to those deeper emotional parts of the brain that Cristina introduced you to. The second key takeout is really to try and come up with those joint tools. And I suppose we've got a number of key findings or key conclusions to date. The first of which is much of the information and findings that come out of neuroscience, they are likely to also have been revealed by survey research. So not everything, as you could have imagined from what I've just told you, we wouldn't have found out by group discussions or other types of research. But there are some aspects that are coming out from neuroscience that do seem to be adding stuff, particularly in relation to reactions to casting within the advertising, which perhaps people wouldn't be able to verbalize, but it's an instinctive reaction that we're getting coming through. Also in relation to the reaction to messaging, and also brand responses, a little of which you just saw with the McCoy's ad, but we've seen that in other advertising too. We do believe obviously that neuroscience cannot reveal how people are able to talk about advertising, and obviously with the whole issue around amplifying communications effects with word of mouth, it's still very important to measure that with survey research and other methodologies as well. So this is still very much work in progress for us. We're looking very much towards an early stage creative development, so not necessarily what I've just shown you, linking that with qualitative. And that's really where we're stepping forward at the moment.
Now to finish our contribution for today's 5 key messages that we wanted to leave you with. The first one is that satisfying consumers' needs at an emotional level is key to successful branding. The second one is the use of biometrics will allow us to get closer to our target audiences by understanding a more holistic picture of the emotional connections within the brand-consumer relationship. The third one, neuroscience is providing, as we have seen, new insights into our understanding of unconscious emotional reactions. But neuroscience is an addition to, not a substitute for, traditional research methods, as Helen just has told you. And then the importance of these bridges. The bridges are built between science and business practice, but we cannot stop this. We have to see what these scientists are doing in order to understand better our consumers. And then it will be the 6 key messages, so more than 5. We need to be cautious, as the science is still in discovery phase, and there is still a huge amount that we don't know about the brain. So we cannot easily jump into conclusions. That's why this is still work in progress for us. We are saying this, but just on Sunday, a quote from last weekend Sunday Times, Dr. Ramachandran said, "We need to stay completely honest with ourselves and acknowledge that we have only discovered a tiny fraction of what there is to know about human brain. So there is a lot of studying going on, but we need to understand which are the limitations as well."